In her very first appearance on the silver screen, Lauren Bacall not only captivated audiences, but also shook the very foundations of Hollywood with a scandalous love triangle involving herself, director Howard Hawks, and actor Humphrey Bogart. The affair didn't just stir gossip, it left Hawks feeling deeply betrayed. Behind the glittering lights of fame, Bacall had stepped into Hollywood's most dangerous game. Real love versus scripted passion. But what was the dark secret she carried for the rest of her life? Only when you hear the full story will you truly understand. You know, you don't have to act with me, Steve. You don't have to say anything, and you don't have to do anything. Before we dive deeper, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of tea, or just water, and sit back as we begin this journey together. Lauren Bacall, born Betty Joan Persky in 1,924 inches, New York City. Throughout much of her life, Bacall remained a private person, but secrets never stay buried forever. When her parents divorced in 1932, her father left without a word, abandoning the 8-year-old girl and her mother to struggle for survival amid America's Great Depression. His absence left a void that Bacall could never truly fill, shaping her into a woman who learned early to rely only on herself and to hide her emotions behind that famously cool, distant gaze. Through interviews and accounts from those who knew her, it's clear she never held much affection for the father who disappeared from her life. From her high school years, Bacall had an unshakable ambition. She wanted to be famous. But beneath that desire for recognition lay something purer, a genuine love for the stage. On nights when the theatre lights glowed, she would sit captivated, studying every gesture and breath of the actors. Then one evening, after watching Marked Women starring B. Davis, she was spellbound. Davis became the woman Bacall longed to embody. Yet fate had a twist. That very film made her fall in love with someone else, Humphrey Bogart. When the screen went dark, she turned to her friend and said, "I'm crazy about that man." But Hollywood dreams rarely come easily. Bacall started with small, humble jobs, modelling, working as a theatre usher, anything that brought her closer to the world of art. The turning point came when she was 18. A photograph of Bacall on the cover of Harper's Bazaar caught the eye of Slim Keith, one of Hollywood's most influential women. Keith brought the magazine home to her husband, director Howard Hawks, and said, "I think this girl has something special." With just one look, Hawks believed he had found the new face of American cinema. He told his secretary to contact Bacall, but instead of making a phone call, the secretary sent her a plane ticket to Hollywood. What seemed like a small mistake turned out to be the moment that would change the young woman's life forever. In Hollywood, Bacall arrived with almost nothing. No experience, no reputation. She trembled during her audition for To Have and Have Not. To hide her nerves, she lowered her chin and looked up at the camera. That simple gesture accidentally created the alluring, hypnotic expression that would later become known as the look of Lauren Bacall. Howard Hawks saw it immediately and knew he had discovered a diamond in the rough. He cast Bacall as the female lead, and even rewrote the script so that her character would be the male lead's only love interest. And that man, ironically, was none other than her teenage idol, Humphrey Bogart. From the first moment they met on set, the two were drawn to each other by an inexplicable energy. The 25-year age gap meant nothing compared to the magnetic pull between them. After just one day of filming, Bogart leaned over, kissed her, and softly said, "Give me your phone number." Bacall wrote it down on a matchbook, a small gesture that marked the beginning of a secret romance. But in Hollywood, love always came with scandal. At the time, Bogart was still married to his fiery wife, actress Mayo Method. Meanwhile, director Howard Hawks, the man who had created Bacall, began showing signs of blind jealousy. He spent hours with her on set, not only as a director, but as a man desperate to possess what he could not have. When he realised the young actress didn't return his feelings, Hawks grew angry and tried to control her through an exclusive studio contract. When rumours of Beale and Bogart's affair began to spread, Hawks erupted in fury. He threatened to cancel her contract and bury her career before it even started. Terrified, Beale turned to Bogart, who immediately took her side. The clash between the two powerful men became so intense that Warner Brothers had to step in. Jack Warner, the legendary studio head, personally summoned Hawks to his office and ordered him to stop all acts of retaliation. When To Have and Have Not premiered, no one expected it to make history. It wasn't a box office sensation, but it gave birth to a phenomenon, Lauren Bacall. In just a few scenes, the 9-year-old girl left all of Hollywood breathless. That smoky gaze, that husky voice, and the now legendary line, "You know how to whistle, don't you?" turned her into an icon. They said that when she entered the frame, Bogart, the seasoned, hardened man, melted. Just 8 days after the film's release, he announced that he was leaving the home he shared with his third wife, actress Mayo Method. The film industry has always loved couples born from the screen, and Hollywood knows exactly how to turn them into legends. Following the success of To Have and Have Not, studios rushed to reunite Bogart and Beale for another project, The Big Sleep. By the fall of 1944, when they met again, the relationship had already moved beyond art. But life never follows the script. Just 11 days after declaring his separation from Method, Bogart broke Beale's heart, publicly announcing that he would return to his wife. That was the moment Beale understood that loving an experienced man also meant accepting the darkness of his past. Bogart had once vowed to save his third marriage at all costs, but whiskey and Method's explosive temper finally destroyed it. That Christmas, in a house filled with the smell of alcohol and resentment, their marriage came to an end. And when Bogart walked out, he went straight to Beale without looking back. On May 10th, 1945, his divorce was finalised. Just 11 days later, they married in a simple ceremony in Ohio. No glamorous gowns, no Hollywood spotlight, just close friends and two people who had finally found peace after the storm. Everyone said the marriage wouldn't last. Bogart was already 45, a full quarter-century older than her, but they proved that love doesn't need logic to survive. From that moment on, Beale was no longer just a talented young actress. She became Mrs. Bogart, a new symbol of Hollywood's golden elite. It was in their own home that the phrase, "the Rat Pack," was born. During a noisy party, tired of her husband's drunk friends, Beale reportedly quipped, "You guys are nothing but a bunch of rats." Frank Sinatra and his pals loved it, and the name stuck forever. If To Have and Have Not was where their love story began, The Big Sleep was the proof of their perfect chemistry. Under Howard Hawks' direction, Bogart and Beale didn't just act, they lived. Every glance, every breath, every word carried the fire of a love that was real. The film became a massive success, and to this day, it stands as one of the greatest noir masterpieces ever made. In the years that followed, they starred together in 3 more films. Instead of chasing new opportunities, Beale chose to stay by her husband's side. She turned down countless scripts, earning the press nickname the most difficult star in Hollywood. In 1945, the Women's Press Club even voted her the least cooperative actress, but that was simply because she only accepted roles she believed in. 6 suspensions from Warner Brothers didn't break her spirit. Finally, in 1951, the studio gave up and released her from her contract. Hollywood has always been cruel to women who know what they want. To many directors, Beale was nothing more than Bogart's wife. But to Beale, motherhood was the role she desired most. Bogart, despite 3 previous marriages, had never had children. When Beale struggled to get pregnant, he began hormone treatments to increase his chances, and the cost was steep. Within months, his hair fell out completely. Yet, their efforts were rewarded. In 1949, Beale gave birth to their first child, a son, Stephen Humphrey Bogart, named after the character his father had played in To Have and Have Not, the very film that had brought them together. Not long after, she gave birth to their daughter, Leslie Howard Bogart. For a while, Beale finally had the happy family she had always dreamed of. But nothing beautiful lasts forever. She was one of the brightest stars in Hollywood. Yet Beale carried a secret she could never fully reveal: her religion. All her life, she considered herself Jewish. But to survive and succeed in a town rife with prejudice, she had to hide that part of her identity. Following Bogart's advice, she even allowed their 2 children to be baptized as Christians so they could have what he called an easier life in an America still shadowed by discrimination. If Jack Warner had ever thought Beale's career would fade after leaving his studio, he was wrong. The first film she made after becoming a mother, How to Marry a Millionaire, co-starring Marilyn Monroe and Betty Grable, became a major box office hit. In the early 1950s, when the owner of Grauman's Chinese Theatre invited her to leave her handprints and footprints in the legendary cement, Beale smiled and declined. "I don't feel I've earned it yet," she said. In an era when every star longed for immortality under the spotlight, her humility made all of Hollywood pause in respect. As Beale began signing new film deals with Fox, Humphrey Bogart, her husband, confidant, and screen legend left Warner Brothers to start his own production company. But fate was already knocking quietly. Bogart began to feel pain in his throat and difficulty swallowing. Beale urged him to see a doctor, and the diagnosis shattered them both. He had esophageal cancer. In those days, Beale lived on the thin line between hope and despair. She threw herself into work, perhaps to escape the fear that haunted her nights. On screen in Designing Women, audiences saw a radiant, confident Beale, but behind the camera was a weary wife, with dark circles under her eyes, staying awake through endless nights beside her husband's hospital bed. Bogart underwent a grueling surgery. His esophagus, 2 lymph nodes, and part of a rib were removed. Though doctors called it successful, the disease quietly returned, stronger than before. Chemotherapy left him so weak he could no longer climb the stairs, and the house once filled with laughter was now haunted by the sound of his horse coughing through the night. A year later he slipped into a coma. Beale held his hand until his final breath. When Bogart died at the age of 57, he weighed barely 80 pounds. All of Hollywood mourned, but no one could grasp the depth of Beale's loss. A 32-year-old woman, suddenly widowed, left with 2 small children and a void that could never be filled. As Beale's world was collapsing, another man stepped into her life, Frank Sinatra. He had been Bogart's close friend, someone who had shared dinners and long, quiet evenings with her. From mutual grief and understanding, a fragile affection began to grow. Sinatra cared for her the way Bogart once had, gently, thoughtfully, yet with a streak of impulsive mystery. Beale knew her heart hadn't healed, but she was too weary to resist. Then one evening, Sinatra suddenly proposed. The news sent shock waves through Hollywood, but just days later, he abruptly cut off all contact. The reason was painfully trivial. Their engagement had leaked to the press. A friend of Ball's had told gossip columnist Luella Parsons. The next morning, headlines screamed, "Sinatra engaged to Beale." Enraged, Sinatra felt betrayed and ended the relationship without a word. For him, it was over. For her, it was the second deep wound. The first being Bogart's death. Unable to endure the suffocating gossip of Hollywood, Beale left Los Angeles and returned to New York, the city where it had all begun. She bought an apartment in the Dakota Building, which would later become famous as John Lennon's home and the place where he was killed. There she met Jason Rhodes, a stage actor in the middle of a divorce. Jason was nothing like Sinatra. He was earthy, intense, and a little haunted. Amid the dim lights and late nights of Broadway, they fell deeply in love, as if life had given her one last chance to believe in love again. Their love, though passionate, was not without turbulence. They planned to marry in Vienna, but the Austrian government denied them a license. They tried Las Vegas, famous for its quick weddings, but were turned away there too. Finally, they drove across the border to Mexico and were married in 1961, exactly 1 month later than planned. The reason for the rush was simple. Beale was pregnant. A few months later, she gave birth to her son, Sam Rorts. For a time, life seemed peaceful. She had a home, a stage, and the laughter of a child. But happiness couldn't conceal the cracks. Jason drank heavily, arguments grew frequent, and Beale, after everything she had endured, had learned to stay silent. She kept acting, kept smiling for the public. But deep down, her heart had long since turned to stone. In 1968, after 7 years of marriage to Jason Robards, Beale was forced to face a bitter truth. The man she once trusted had sunk too deeply into alcoholism to be saved. She, who had never lived alone since the age of 19, finally found the courage to cut all ties and choose freedom. It was the greatest turning point in her life. Not just a divorce, but a declaration of self-ownership. From the ruins, Beale carried with her two precious things, her son Sam and her renewed passion for the stage. Rorts, though a failed husband, had left her with a gift, a love for theatre, an art form that demanded honesty, discipline and courage. On stage, Beale was no longer an icon. She was simply herself, raw, strong, and vividly alive. In 1970, the spotlight found her once again when Beale won the prestigious Tony Award for her role in Applause, a musical adaptation of All About Eve, the same film that had once starred her childhood idol, Bette Davis. Life, it seemed, had come full circle. Years earlier, the young Beale had once gone to a hotel just to catch a glimpse of Davis. And many years later, it was Davis who came backstage, took Beale's hand and said, "You were magnificent." In that moment, Beale realised that the truest recognition doesn't come from trophies. It comes from the admiration of those we once looked up to. In the years that followed, Beale worked tirelessly, choosing her roles with the same care and integrity she had shown at her peak. Then fate handed her a late gift. Her performance in The Mirror has two faces. 1,996 earned her the first Oscar nomination of her career after half a century of dedication. She won the Golden Globe, and everyone believed the golden statuette would be hers as well. But on the night of the Academy Awards, the winner was Juliette Binoche. The entire audience fell silent. Critics declared no one deserved it more than Lauren Bacall. Yet she simply smiled. For her, glory was no longer the goal. Endurance itself was the victory. In 2010, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences presented Bacall with an honorary Oscar, a long overdue recognition for everything she had given to cinema. Only a few months later, she passed away peacefully in her Manhattan apartment, the home that had sheltered her for decades. But Lauren Bacall was more than a movie star. She was a woman who dared to say no to male power in an era when women were treated as ornaments to fame. When director Howard Hawks, the man who discovered her, confessed his love, Bacall flatly refused. Hawks was furious, especially after learning that she had fallen for Humphrey Bogart, a man 20 years her senior. Years later, he spoke bitterly. Bogart fell in love with the character she played, and she had to live that role for the rest of her life. But Bacall didn't just play the part of Bogart's woman, she was his soulmate. After his death, she admitted she lost all sense of direction, often waking up in the middle of the night from nightmares, calling out his name in tears. At the funeral, she placed a small whistle inside his coffin, the same one Bogart had given her in their early days, engraved with the words, "If you need me, just whistle." It was the line that had first brought them together into Have and Have Not, the film where their love began. And perhaps somewhere in the heavens above Hollywood, Bogart is still waiting for that soft whistle. The call of the woman who spent her life searching for freedom, yet never stopped loving him.